Okay, so thank you for joining us and welcome to the National Adaptation Forum's Heat Stress Series hosted by EcoAdapt. I'm Molly Johnson, one of the forum organizers and your organizer for today's webinar, Community-Based Solutions to Heat in Urban Settings. For those of you returning to the forum, welcome back. And for those who it's your first time attending a session, welcome. I'd like to go through some housekeeping ground rules to ensure we have a successful session today. So to help reduce feedback, please place your telephone, cell phone, or computer on mute, even if you're called in using a voice over IP option. Please also use the question function in your control panel to submit any questions to the presenters throughout the session. Please also use this function to report any technical issues you may be having. We will be recording and posting this session on the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange for future viewing, and it should be available online next week and can be viewed at www.cakex.org. Additionally, slides and presenter information are available to download in your Handouts tab. So you can find that and get that information there. And throughout this heat stress series, we will be compiling recommended resources on heat stress for attendees and the larger adaptation community. So you can make suggestions to the resource page by following the link that my colleague will post in the chat box. And finally, we want to thank those who've already donated to the forum. If you haven't already, please consider making a gift of $20 per session or $60 for the heat stress series, or paying what you can. Your donation helps us continue to do our work and to keep the forum and adaptation moving forward. So thank you for your consideration. And if your organization is interested in sponsoring or learning about sponsorship opportunities, you can contact us at the email on your screen, info@nationaladaptationforum.org. I also would like to do a few acknowledgements before we begin. So I'd like to acknowledge that there are many people experiencing immediate threats to their lives and livelihoods due to climate change impacts, including the most recent disasters and tragedies that occurred due to the extreme cold polar vortex. I want to recognize those who live on the front lines of climate change, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and low-income communities. And while we are here today to talk about heat stress, we encourage you to share about your work, your experiences, and what brings you to this session via the question function, as well as on our virtual networking platforms. We also want to thank you for attending today, despite all of the challenges due to the ongoing pandemic. I know virtual is not as easy as it seems, so thank you. Okay, with all that said, I'm really pleased to introduce today's presenters. So here to discuss the Philadelphia Beat the Heat initiative is Christine Knapp, who's the director of the Office of Sustainability for the City of Philadelphia. We also have Cheyenne Flores, who's the Climate Resiliency Fellow of the Office of Sustainability for the City of Philadelphia. We have Ms. Priscilla Johnson, who's the Hunting Park Neighborhood Block Captain and Community Coordinator, and Charles Lanier, who's the Executive Director of the Hunting Park Neighborhood Advisory Committee. And then here from Arizona are those to discuss the Nature's Cooling System project. We have Masavi Perea from Coalition, who is the Coalition and Training Director for Chispa, Arizona, Melissa Gardaro, who's the Assistant Research Professor at Julie Ann Wrigley Global Institute for Sustainability and Innovation at Arizona State University, and Ryan Winkle, who is the Executive Director of the Retail Arts Innovation and Livability, or RAIL, Community Development Corporation in Phoenix, East Valley. So there's actually more information on the presenters in your Handouts tab, and you can download and learn more about what they do. But with that said, I'm going to start off with the Phoenix team to get us going. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We love to talk about this work because it's still going on. And I'm going to start off, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to start off just providing some basic background information. And then we're going to have our community partners really do the bulk of the discussion about what it's like to do community engagement, what you need to do before you actually have the community engagement, what happens during the engagement, and how things have changed due to COVID. Next slide, please. So the urban heat island, I don't know if most of you know this, I'm just going to go through it one more time, but the urban heat island is a result of how our cities are built. So when you have an urban form that's built with a lot of concrete and materials that hold on to the heat, at night it doesn't cool down as much as the rural areas. So you can see here that on this chart that in the nighttime in the urban areas, there's very little difference between nighttime and daytime temperatures. The swing is much less. But when you get out into the other parts of the city, there is a much bigger swing. And the thing that's important about this is that this is a nighttime phenomenon, and this is what directly impacts public health as well. Next slide, please. And I'm going to use Phoenix as an example, but perhaps this is applicable to a lot of other cities. And I want you to focus on that red dot. And you can see that the summer that we had last year in 2020, the number of days that were 110 degrees is the same that was predicted for 2045. So we are seeing a rapid acceleration of heating up the city. And it's definitely an urgent problem. Next slide, please. And it also has deadly consequences. And what's so heartbreaking is that this is totally avoidable. If we had better systems in place to allow people to have cooling overnight, if we had areas that were not more than 13 degrees hotter than the cooler areas in the city, a lot of this could have been avoided. Next slide, please. And it also comes at great expense as well. So when you're just calculating out the cost of emergency room visits and inpatient admissions just due to heat in one county, in Maricopa County in 2018, the total cost was $56 million. And if you study it over a 10-year period statewide, that amount of money is $17.8 billion with a B, billion dollars that are spent because we are not managing our heat well. So what are we going to do about this? I mean, it's certainly doable. You see a lot of policies trying to be made at the city level and the regional level, but we have this methodology that we used for a community engagement, and this is just one type of community engagement. Next slide, please. And the purpose of this was not just to plan, do, act, and revise. As you can see here, we engage, and then we had design workshops, and then we built a plan, and then we're going to implement. The idea behind this really was to build social capital amongst our communities, to really empower our communities. So you see the yellow bubbles on the outside, that we wanted to increase participation. And you'll hear my colleagues talk about how people say, yeah, it's Phoenix, it's hot, you know, there's nothing we can do, but we really stressed, yes, there is something that you can do. So then we got people together and we tried to get everybody to become a cohesive group and build that bonding social capital. And then through demonstration projects and through our workshops, we built bridging and linking social capital. And right now we're in the process of trying to do collective action. Next slide, please. So we selected 3 communities, and this is all outlined in our heat action planning guide that we'll have the link at the end. But just briefly, we see a lot of heat vulnerability maps that talk about socioeconomic factors, talk about level of greenness, talk about health statistics. But we also wanted to make sure that the area that we were going to do this work in had a strong sense of community already, that it had community identity, and that there was also some sort of development work that was going on so that we could help from a grassroots level apply a lens for cooling factors. Next slide, please. So we selected 3 neighborhoods. The Edison Eastlake neighborhood is the largest concentration of public housing in Phoenix, and they were undergoing a $30 million HUD grant. And the Mesa Water Tower Improvement District that Ryan represents, this is in Mesa, and Mesa is just exploding in terms of development. And Mesabi represents the Lindo Rosalie Park, which is a South Phoenix neighborhood. And there, the light rail has been extended. We're still building light rail in the valley here. And as a result, there's also that fear of gentrification coming along as well. Next slide, please. So we affectionately call this the hug chart. And this was really how we approached our whole methodology. We have a core team that initially was Arizona State University, the Nature Conservancy, Maricopa County Department of Public Health, and then we selected the neighborhoods, and then we selected the community-based organizations. And the whole point of this plan was to empower the community-based organizations to then own these plans. And then it's not ASU's plan, it's not the Nature Conservancy's plan, it's the community's plan to do with what they want. So the community-based organizations went out and found the residents, because after all, they should know who should be at the table. And then during this process, we also brought in municipal decision makers, experts, other CBOs to really support both the residents and the CBOs. So we have a pact that we're not going to present these heat action plans, anybody from the former core team, ASU, the Nature Conservancy, or the health department, without the community-based organizations being present, because it is their plan. So next slide. And they are actually the key. So right now I'm going to turn it over to my community partners.
Oh, all right, thank you very much. Mesabi, you want to go ahead, or do you want me to start?
We can't hear you, Mesabi.
While Mesabi gets his mic going, I think it'll be very important to note that all of these plans, thank you, Melissa, for making sure that we stay on track with keeping our pact to the communities. They are developed at the speed of trust. So a plan like this doesn't work without the trust of the community, especially as community organizers like Mesabi and myself. You don't just go into community and start saying, hey, who has all the contacts for this neighborhood? I want to start talking to them right now about this great plan. It doesn't work that way. So Mesabi, go ahead. Are you there?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me well now?
Yes.
Okay, Mesabi Perea here with Chispa, Arizona. Thank you, everyone. From Phoenix, Arizona, enjoying these 73 degrees right now. And I want to acknowledge something very important that Maurice, that Melissa said, right? This is a living document. We have been we're still talking with the community, right? We're still learning about this community. And absolutely, as Ryan said, one of our first steps is to acknowledge the knowledge of the community, but also to acknowledge the resiliency of the community, right? That was the very first step, and this was a very intense conversation with the community. Can we go to the next slide, please? Right. Yes. Thank you. So one of the first steps was to pre-engage. First, we want to know like the neighborhoods. We want to know what is on the neighborhood, so that way we can create a plan to see what do we want to do. Right. So this was the first step. Taking photos, videos of the neighborhood, talking with people, so we can create a plan. Can we go to the next slide, please?
As community-based organizations, and as organizers, as you always know, you see this person as like, oh, I have a clipboard and I have my sneakers, and you see me in the neighborhood and doing these things, right? Well, this was an extra special challenge, because when you're normally organizing in a neighborhood, you're saying something like, hey, they're gonna build this building right over our park and we need you to act now. Well, this is a little different, because during heat, action planning, you're talking to someone about 20 years of something that's been changing, or 30 years for them specifically living in that neighborhood, watching the heat grow in their neighborhood, or the trees not be there anymore, or taking the bus and bus changes. So we had to do the usual things, right? They're knocking at the doors, leaving flyers, talking to people, going door to door. But we took extra steps of collecting stories, and I think they're documented even on our repository as well. These great stories of these people who have lived there for 2 or 3 generations. The neighborhood I work in specifically is historically the most Latino neighborhood in Mesa, the most densely populated, the longest underinvested for many years, like 50 years of no investment or little investment. I mean, it's just got everything that you could ever want as far as like an issue to have, right? On top of this, there's a group of moms seeking help for drug addiction in that neighborhood, and they all work there. They live there with their kids. We see them taking their bus every single day, 2 or 3 buses, because the bus system in Arizona isn't the greatest. I mean, it's great, but not the greatest. And so doing all this stuff, and then even offering them money to come to these meetings, because they're taking time out of their work days as a young mom with a kid, walking down the street and bringing their kid with them to the meeting. This is the important piece of this. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if Masabi wants to weigh in on this one, but I think one of the big takeaways on this is we start thinking about who has the power, where is the power aggregated, and who has the ability to act. So when we were bringing somebody into this conversation and we're saying, hey, excuse me, Mr. Council member, or hello, city manager, or hello, whoever this is, we want you to come and talk to the residents of this area. And they think, oh, great, I'm gonna come and present something to them, because that's kind of the usual, right? We're like, no, what we want is for them to come talk to you, but you need to come and meet them where they are. So it's kind of setting roles and who is supposed to be doing what, because even on the neighborhood side, everyone gets mad and starts saying, oh, why didn't my council member do this? And the council member might not have that much input on that one thing, Anything else, Masadi, that you want to add, or Melissa?
No, I think that we should move through the slides a little bit quicker, because the good stuff is at the end.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so once again, all these things that we did came up with these tools and these ways of telling stories. And so we had these group meetings where we would have maps out, people would point to things, and then we would talk about this, and then we'd put it in these locations for people to see. Go ahead, next story. Next slide, sorry. Here was a pretty cool example of something that we did, where we had the people come in and map out things and say, hey, you walk this neighborhood every day, where is a space that you feel is cooler than others, or where is a place that's hotter than others? On the next slide, you can see that as well. Right here.
Yeah, Ryan, can I add here?
Yes, please jump in.
Yeah, my apologies, the internet is very slow. Yes, something else that normally the community, right, always asks is like, they when you start conversations with people, and you share data, some people, they just don't it's not that they don't get it, it's that they don't want to hear numbers, they want to see actions. And this map is one of the perfect examples of what a community needs. Something very simple, a very linear communication. So what we did over here is we went through the map of the community, right? And then the people, because they are the one who lives on the community, they know which spots are hotter than other spots, right? So right here, people, they describe us the neighborhood, again, because they know the neighborhood. And also they find places where they think that we should work as a cool spots. Next slide, please. So something as Melissa was mentioning, right? On this conversation, we have people from the city, people from the university, right? So sometimes our community, they are not used to talk to to government or to academics, right? So the question here to our community is like, you need to engage, right? And not only because you have the knowledge, but also because you can change your neighborhood, right? This is another level of civic engagement. But again, we have to remind all the time to government and to academics that they need to speak in a level that people understand them. We have to meet people where they are in order to make real changes, but also in order to build trust, right? We are not here to educate the community. We are here to work with the community together.
So to that point, we had a rule that any presentation had to be a story. So we couldn't have the charts with the regression analysis. We had a climatologist come in and tell the story of a giant who's trying to figure out where to step in the valley because some places are really super hot and other places are cooler. And we use the language of science, but when you tell it in the form of a story, people really remember it and they really get it. So everyone had to tell a story.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's also part of the importance. You have to remind people, right, that their story is very important and that we are gonna learn from them. Can you please go to the next slide? Okay, so this slide is I love this slide because this is the face of the community. This is the face of the community listening, understanding, right? And then we did this also this activity, right, where we are a circle, right, where everyone is equal, and where everyone who wants to join the conversation, they just join to the circle in the middle, right? But however, everyone on this picture, on the second picture, everyone is active listening, right? So sometimes you are having a conversation, but it doesn't matter that the ones that are listening are less important. You know, this is a very good activity where everybody is on the same level, because sometimes government officials, not on Phoenix, right? They feel like there are more than people, right? And this exercise help to remind the community that they are as same as important of a government and academics. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure, and we got 5 minutes until we switch over to the next team. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to continue?
This is the heat action planning guide, and it's available at the link. There's separate pullouts for the different communities, but it's all available online for you to follow along with. Next slide.
Yes. Thank you. And again, this is another exercise, right? This is people working. This is people putting their ideas. This is where people is activating. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the solution, right? So again, we can talk about data, we can talk about many other things. However, what people want to see is something very simple, so people can understand in a better and easier way. Like, oh, okay. So if I plant a native trees, right, my neighborhood is gonna look different. If you know, so we can design what we wanna do on the neighborhood, but the community is the one who's gonna tell you, this work for my kids, this can work for my neighborhood. Can we please go to the next slide? So again,
Yeah,
this is a city. Oh, this is your place, Ryan. You want to go?
Oh yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, this was important for us because a lot of the young moms and the people in the neighborhood, the elderly folks, they were walking in these areas where you see the top one was very hard to walk in, lots of sun, and then the bottom one was just shifting a few things around, not even huge costs. You could just change this for somebody.
And what's important here is that that's the Broadway corridor that there's development undergoing right now. So the community actually can have their wishes represented as part of this plan too.
This plan actually kind of helped inform that, by the way, that investment. So next slide, please.
So again, we are community organizers, right? So what do? We empower people, right? So one of the first tools that people needs to go to is to advocacy training, right? We are gonna make changes through advocacy. So people need to understand like all the levels of advocacy that we need to do. And we have to educate ourselves and we have to educate our communities as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so yeah, do you wanna go, Ryan?
So part of what we did was really try to infuse social justice in all aspects of our work. So while all these community engagements were going on, the core team and the CBOs got together and we built this rubric called Whole Measures for Urban Heat. And you can see the different categories. And then we built out what would success look like. So for an example in community engagement, the objective was to cultivate reciprocal and supportive relationships with community-based organizations. And a negative would be disregarding the community leaders, weaken existing partnerships, and I think we can point to some engagements that have actually not helped the community at all, to a neutral where the relationships and trust in the community remained unchanged, to the highest impact that is the relationships between heat vulnerable neighborhood residents, not-for-profit groups, universities, other decision makers are collaborative, strong, based on trust and respect, and investment is made in sustaining these relationships beyond the length of these individual projects. So we're hoping that this is what we're doing because this project officially ended last January, and yet we're still working together, and we as a group meet every 2 months to continue that work. Next slide.
And just to add a little bit of what Melissa said, something that we as a community organizers, we want to make sure is that there is equity and justice on all these plans. We need to make sure of that. Yeah. Please go ahead. Okay, so on next one, we have been, as we said at the beginning, we continue working right on these projects, and I can talk about the spaces of opportunity and Rosley Park, right? That our community still is engaged. As Melissa said, we finished this project a year ago, but my community in South Phoenix, they're still very connected through these garden spaces for opportunity.
And for on the East Valley side, we're using this heat action plan to actually inform changes along this whole corridor already. And the city is kind of, I mean, they've adopted it. They need some more help with it. And this is where we encourage everyone on here who's a city worker or a planner or anything like that, be a hero. Just fit it in, just silently put it in there. When you talk to your city council or anyone else, just act like it's a great thing that needs to go into all your plans.
So that's our presentation, and I just want to also point out the fact that the plans, when you see them, it's not just plug and play. It's really this whole process that we went through as a team and the team building that was as important as the final plan that came out. And if you are interested in following that format, please go to the heat planning guide that's available online. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Melissa, Ryan, and Masavi. For anyone who's listening, if you want to submit a question to the team, we'll be taking questions at the end, so you can definitely ask a question in the question function. At this point, I'm going to welcome the Philadelphia team to talk about their work.
Hi, so I'm Christine Knapp. I'm the director of the city's Office of Sustainability. I'm going to go to the next slide, please. So our office works to implement the city's sustainability framework, which covers these 8 key areas. As you can see in vision number 4, we are also sort of responsible for coordinating the city's response to climate change, both reducing sources of carbon pollution, but also increasingly preparing our residents and our communities for the change in climate that we're already experiencing in Philadelphia. Next slide. We say that Philadelphia is getting hotter and wetter, and while we do have risks from sea level rise and flooding and storm events, heat is by far our biggest risk. In fact, a FEMA analysis found that Philadelphia was maybe the most heat at-risk city in the country. And you can see that while we're already experiencing hotter temperatures, that it could get even worse by the end of the century with as many as 52 days over 95 degrees. Next slide, please. And not all of this heat is going to be experienced equally around Philadelphia. That's the map of our city borders. We've had 2 different rounds of heat mapping, one set in 2015 and this one more recently, that can show us the differences in temperatures, and that difference can be as much as 22 degrees between our hottest and coolest neighborhoods. And hotter neighborhoods are almost entirely low-income communities and communities of color. Next slide, please. So our office set out to sort of understand this difference in the 22-degree difference, and found 3 different areas of the city that were both high heat, but also where residents were more heat vulnerable based on different demographic information, whether that was age or income or illnesses. One of those neighborhoods was Hunting Park, and we were able to partner with folks who are on this call and others to launch the Beat the Heat Hunting Park resiliency pilot. And there is the final report is there. I'm going to talk more about it through, but for folks who want to read it, we can maybe, Shai, can you drop the link in the chat that's there for folks to get directly to it? But I'll walk through some pieces of it and how we got there. Next slide, please. So the first question was really understanding why it's so hot in Hunting Park. And, it really came down to a couple of big areas of there's more industry, there's less trees, and there's a lot more dark surfaces that absorb heat. Next slide, please. We also have a history of redlining in many parts of Philadelphia, but we could definitely see it in Hunting Park, where there was, that was a long ago practice, but it's still having repercussions today, not just on heat, but on a variety of different social equity issues. So we have to really make sure that we point out that racial inequity is sort of the main driver of this heat disparity and continues to be so. Next slide, please. So the goals, again, really understanding how residents experience heat and what resources they wanted to see to both stay cool in the moment, but also what can we do in the longer term to help make the neighborhood cooler. Really sharing more information about this heat disparity and the impact, and helping people access resources to stay safe and healthy, and then working together on creating sort of a neighborhood plan with these recommendations of how to improve, again, the short term and the long term. Next, please. So there's a variety of different tactics that were underway. There was a heat team that was formed with both city and community partners. We had some heat ambassadors who helped conduct surveying throughout the community, resource tables. We held a heat design workshop similar to what it looked like happened in Phoenix in terms of people identifying areas in the neighborhood where a bus shelter might be needed or a tree would be desirable, to kind of really map it out block by block. Next slide, please. And the last 3 slides here are just the big opportunities that were organized within that community-led plan. Greening and trees, a big area of interest, street trees and other sort of vegetation, more gardens and green spaces, using some vacant lots in particular in the community. The neighborhood itself is called Hunting Park. There is actually an enormous, beautiful park in the community, but that could be a better resource if it was better lit and there was better access to it for folks to get into it. And then really addressing litter and dumping prevention to keep the neighborhood clean. Next slide, please. Another opportunity was staying cool and safe at home. So better access to air conditioning and fans, home with energy repairs. LIHEAP is a program that many folks are familiar with for winter sort of heating billing assistance, but it is not currently available regularly for summer months. And with our climate moving towards milder winters and hotter summers, we really need to be advocating for making that program available year-round, or even reducing its use during winter in order to make it available during the summer, because folks are experiencing more utility burden in the summertime now. Cool roofs were of high interest, as well as other cool pavement projects that could be done in the neighborhood to again, reduce the amount of blacktop, dark surfaces that absorb heat. And last slide for me, please, next. And then staying cool in public spaces. So again, air conditioning in public spaces like schools and rec centers. A highly sought after idea was a network of basically cooling centers, but the city operates cooling centers in certain locations, mostly in libraries, that aren't in Hunting Park. So this would really be relying on institutions that are already in the community where people can go to access cooling. And I think Shai will talk more about that, as well as bus shelters, and then reducing the heat put off by vehicles, as well as other air pollution by rerouting and prioritizing electric bus routes for those neighborhoods. I think the next slide, we switch over to Shai, is that right? Yep, there you go.
Yes, thanks, Christine. Good job. You got it done in the time. So I'm Cheyenne or Shy of the Office of Sustainability, and I had the absolute pleasure of being able to work with Hunting Park residents this past summer and a little bit the summer before that. This summer is when we really began to implement the plan that was just dropped in the chat if you want to check it out, that Christine just walked through. And when I say implement is because we actually tried to take one of the ideas identified in the opportunities that Christine just laid out and put it into place. Next slide, please. So the idea was to make a heat relief system, right? So a heat relief network, a system of places where folks could go and be cool, and using money from a grant that we got from the EPA to do that. However, COVID hit. So next slide, please. It didn't make sense to congregate people in places anymore, and especially as more research came out about air conditioning units and HVAC systems in general and air quality and all these things that we were learning about the safety of this virus, we decided that it made more sense to get people tangible resources as quickly as possible. So with the team that we had a steering committee, so we had folks come together and make decisions. We had community cooling centers, so we did actually open 2 locations that were open to the public to come hang out. We shifted some funds to them and helped prop them up a little bit. No one came to them because we didn't have time really to prop it up the way we needed to, and I think also folks were a little weirded out about going places. We had heat ambassadors. The heat ambassador was a compensated role that worked with me on the regular to help distribute surveys, hand out information, share information in general. We had heat relieving resources, so these were fans and air conditioning units primarily. We handed out 100 fans and over 25 air conditioning units delivered right to residents, and these residents were identified using a neighbor-to-neighbor referral system. So whoever was in the steering committee, which was majority residents, shared with us if they had neighbors, friends, or family that lived in the neighborhood who might need assistance, and the chain kind of worked its way from there. And then in addition, we had a sort of tangential project that Priscilla is going to talk more about, which is the Drexel University Heat Mitigation Project, basically a block level initiative to help cool down the space. And that basically put in planters, umbrellas, sprinkler systems, art, and it incorporated these things to help cool down the area on a block level way. And then finally, we had a survey. So we got over 600 survey respondents about different questions about heat, about how folks cope with heat, their priorities around heat, and general knowledge of heat resources, heat relieving resources. Next slide, please. So from the survey, I combined both when we did this in 2018 and in 2020 because they were basically the same results, which is what we wanted to see, right? We wanted to see, do folks still care? Are the same priorities in line? And they were in general. So heat is a very important issue. Almost majority, almost 90% said it's very important to them. Many people stay inside when it's hot, which might be a no-brainer, but it's helpful for us to know that information so we know what folks need, right? We know then they need air conditioning units, they need energy efficiency done to their homes, right? Rather than they need somewhere to go. We learned that there's not enough language accessibility in general with applications like LIHEAP, as Christine mentioned, that Spanish speakers were more likely to leave their homes actually than stay. So that was a little bit of an outlier. Most people agreed they need better access to fans and air conditioning. Most people said they sometimes feel too hot in their home. And people were very interested still in cool roofs, gardens and green space, and trees. I would say gardens and green space in general is more attractive to most Philadelphians and Hunting Park residents in particular, which, by the way, is this wonderful neighborhood in North Philly to remind us what we're talking about here. Trees do contribute a bit to trouble and trauma just because of the way trees have been planted here in Philly. And then, as I mentioned, there was low to medium knowledge of utility assistance programs and lower knowledge of that for non-dominant English speakers. Next slide, please. So then we were planning for 2021, and we had this great strategic planning meeting with our steering committee members, and that group grew hugely as we went through the process. Basically, folks identified that their #1 priority is trash. They really want to make sure that their neighborhood stays clean and is not just a one-off after a community works super hard to clean up the neighborhood. So they wanted to know, how can we make it so that it stays clean and we kind of manage dumping, right? They want more gardens and green space, as I think everybody would. People do want trees. Hunting Park residents are into trees, definitely. And then they would like to invest in a heat relief network, so having spaces to go when home is just not the right option. In addition, but less so, there was cooling resources. So still they would love to help folks get access to AC and fans, cool roofs, utility assistance, more focus on utility assistance, and working to strengthen their community cohesion, which is already pretty strong in that neighborhood. And then lastly, cooling centers, so having somewhere to go. And then people loved having a steering committee. They loved having heat ambassadors that were paid. I made sure to also give a little bit of a stipend to folks who went above and beyond but weren't actually heat ambassadors. So I think compensation was hugely important and a priority, and giving away stuff to folks was really helpful as well. We had lots of people tell us that they were able to get through the summer because of the things that they received. I also want to mention, in addition to the fans and AC units, we also handed out heat kits. So the heat kits had hydration tablets. They had resources about utility assistance programs and the project, resources about how to get trees, sunblock, things like that. And then in addition, they had PPE in them. So we handed out, I think, maybe 500 kits. And then we heard some other feedback that folks want to kind of combine problems across neighborhoods. So they want to work with other neighborhoods a little bit more closely. They want to be more involved in the governance of a project, and that is the ultimate goal, right? How can the neighborhood actually be the one completely in the driver's seat? So that's kind of what we're grappling with now. And then we want to be prioritizing folks that are shut in more, right? Because especially because of COVID, folks are having to stay home more. And I think that's it. Next slide, please. I think that's you, Charles. Yes, so I'll introduce Charles. He is the executive director for the Hunting Park Community Revitalization Corporation / Neighborhood Advisory Committee. I hope I said that right, Charles. Take it away.
Correct. That's correct. Yes, thank you for having me. We really had the pleasure of working with the Office of Sustainability to include our services and programs in this entire process. The Hunting Park Community Revitalization Corporation, some of our services and programs include mortgage foreclosure prevention, housing counseling referrals, basic systems repair, rental assistance, rebates, weatherization, utility grants, energy workshops, and energy conservation. We are one of 15 neighborhood energy centers in the city of Philadelphia, and our other services include food distribution, training opportunities, community service, area briefings, and our newsletter. All this, we definitely need to emphasize the importance of community outreach and engagement. And this is how we got this done. We just was out talking about where they are, that's where we went. The survey was great. As Cheyenne stated, that over 500, close to 600 surveys were done. And in addition to the fans and the air conditioners, we were able to outreach to residents and educate them about services and programs to help pay their utility bills, because we provide those grants. And so we have to make sure that we get that information out to people so that we can help reduce their energy burden or reduce their energy bills by providing the grants to pay their past utility costs and help them in the future with budgeting to continue to pay their utility costs or utility services. We've also had the pleasure of working with the Office of Sustainability around the Energy Burden Focus Group. And that group was 3 Zoom meetings with residents and block captains and board members that participated, and to talk about the burden of the utility bills and share the information, share the knowledge, and so forth, as well as have presentations from energy experts who can talk about and educate and provide resources in reference to energy conservation, as well as saving costs on utility bills. We find that people are spending close to 50% of their income towards utility costs, utility bills. This is the burden that we need to try to address, try to educate, and try to continue to engage and inform people as to how to receive these services and programs to reduce their energy costs, as well as continue to have that dialogue, because it's a two-way street. We learn from the community as we give out information to educate. The community educates us, and I think that was very, very important in our outreach efforts. So we are really pro-community, pro-engagement, and pro-outreach. And I'm going to stop here and let Priscilla go forward with her presentation.
Thanks, Charles. And this is Miss Priscilla Johnson. She is, as mentioned, the block captain of Hunting Park Block on Marshall Street, and she will talk a little bit about her experience working with the Drexel Heat Mitigation Project. Go ahead, Priscilla.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I had a great experience with the idea that they were supplying cooler systems for our block, because we have seniors, we have sick people on the block. And as the block captain, my job is to make sure everybody gets what they need to a certain extent and work with people together. Like Mr. Charles was saying, bringing the community together. And through Drexel, they planted benches out, they put plants out, they put water sprinklers out for the children, which they absolutely love. And they're still working on putting the umbrellas out to help with the cooler of the benches. And I'm working along with them with coordinating everything together. We're working with the block and working with people with jobs. They supply jobs for people that help build the benches, actually. And they were excited about building the benches, and everybody, the neighbors, were excited about just beautifying our block as a whole. So I had the pleasure of working with Cheyenne as well and Drexel, and I'm looking forward to moving with more bigger events as we move forward, because it really is about the community.
Short and sweet, Priscilla. Thank you. And yeah, Priscilla's being modest. She really led a lot of that work there. Rah rah. Thank you so much, Priscilla. And I'm so glad that you were part of that project. So kicking it back to me really quickly, and thank you so much, Charles. Charles mentioned our energy burden work. So we are sort of shifting gears into understanding that as COVID potentially will stick around, and as we understand that folks are too hot in their homes and they want to stay home mostly when they're too hot, we need to help folks in their homes and get to them, right? And so that means with help with energy burden. We have quite high energy burden here in Philadelphia. We are, one of the poorest of the largest cities in the nation. And we also just found out that we're actually kind of like #1 heat vulnerability by FEMA's new report. So we're dealing with a lot of things here. So we want to be shifting to focusing on energy burden and energy democracy. So we hosted these focus groups. We had 18 meetings altogether, 3 meetings per group, 6 groups altogether, and then in addition, another partner, PACDC. We compensated everyone who was involved for their time, and then we created a report. So right now we're internally reflecting on that report, and you can kind of see the 2 maps here. We have the energy burden map that we used from GreenLink, the GreenLink and equity map. It's a very helpful, interesting resource that you can get your hands on absolutely for your city. And then next to it, I have sat it next to our heat vulnerability index. And you can see these places that overlap, right, that are both heat vulnerable and energy vulnerable. The meetings focused on gas utility use and preferences. So our gas provider here. Heat inequity, so I talked about heat vulnerability, right? And weatherization. We know that weatherization is a huge important topic, and our residents are very interested in it and in need of it. Next slide, please.
Just a couple minutes left, Shay.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll jump back in here to kind of carry out the last 2 slides. So we have a bunch of different next steps in Hunting Park and the neighborhood itself. The Drexel project will continue on. There's greening and beautification projects that the working group is interested in moving ahead. And then, as Shai and others have already said, the pandemic itself has forced us to shift focus a little bit, particularly on folks who are staying at home more often. From a citywide perspective, we want to make sure we're thinking about what the lessons learned from this work in other city policy decisions. So we're in the middle of an urban forest strategic planning process where heat inequity is a major driver now, because we've been able to sort of insert that into it, as well as bus network planning, violence prevention. It shows up in a lot of different places. We kind of want to continue to share that Beat the Heat toolkit with other neighborhoods outside of Hunting Park and grow, resiliency against heat across the city. There's the state that Pennsylvania is moving towards joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which should help create some funding by auctioning off greenhouse gas credits. And so we would like to make sure a good chunk of those funds go towards frontline communities, and particularly can help with our community-based resiliency efforts. And then expanding communications, as was said by Charles and Priscilla and Shai, getting people information about resources, about programs, grants, is often a challenge. So improving constantly our communications. I think we have one last slide. And then we also are trying to coordinate this all into a citywide climate adaptation plan. I won't go through all those bullets there, but basically what we did in Hunting Park was really drive down deep into one area to understand its risks, its assets, its desires. We need that really for the whole city. We need to kind of understand our risks, both for heat, but also for flooding, and have a sort of more neighborhood-centric approach to the way that we do our adaptation planning for the city. So that's a second-term priority for our mayor. And with the Biden administration coming in, we think there'll be an opportunity to potentially tap into some federal resources to help do more of this work moving ahead. So I think that's it for us. I know we're a little short on time, but thank you so much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you. Thanks for the great presentation, everyone. So I think we'll move into the Q&A portion. And so I want to welcome the Phoenix folks back on, if you can. And I'm going to start with a question that actually can go for, I'd like one person from each team to answer, if possible. So how did you balance the risks of, or how are you balancing the risks of gentrification against the desire for nature-based solutions that mitigate urban heat? Sorry.
I can give a quick answer, but then maybe Charles or Priscilla can give a neighborhood perspective. The answer I usually give is that it becomes a gentrification if it's the greening asset is only in that neighborhood or is not in other parts of the neighborhood. So the best way to not have green gentrification is to have the whole city have trees and have green spaces. And if there's equal access across the city, then we won't have people flooding to one area to access that resource.
Yes, what we try to do is we have to strongly have that engagement activity through what we call our RCO process through the Planning Commission. RCO meaning that the community meetings are held around any development that's coming into the community. And before that developer can get their variance or get permits, or they apply for the permits and ask for a variance, there has to be a community meeting. So the community weighs in on the development project. And also the community talks about with the developer or comes up with a plan for a community benefits agreement, depending on the size of the project. So it's very much an interactive process, or we're trying to be more interactive around the gentrification issue and the development that's coming into our communities, and not just in Hunting Park, but all over Philadelphia, and trying to make sure that we don't displace homeowners, that we focus on housing preservation, and we also do other kinds of community benefits that around jobs and education and so forth. So I can go on and on about that, but it's very important that community and developers work together to make sure that we have a say in what's going on in our communities.
And I can answer from the Phoenix team, and this is a very good important topic. And something that we have to do at the beginning is we have to call it out. We have to acknowledge, and we have to tell the city, we have to tell the government, we have to tell all our partners, this is our community, right? Mi casa no es tu casa. Our community, we want to keep our community, right? We want to tell them, hey, we have been working, right, since many years, so our community, our kids can be safe, right? So we have to acknowledge, we have to tell them many times, right? We want your ideas, we want to work with you, but in order to trust government, in order to trust other partners, right? They need to they need to recognize, right? And they need to say, okay, we are working for this community, not for the progress, right? But for the common good of the community. So, and also another tool is the community involvement, right? That if the community, they are getting involved, right? They are also going to be telling the developers or anyone else, right? They are going to learn how to speak. They are going to learn how to get active. You know, again, going back to the organizing and advocacy training, right? So our community is again is very wise, very knowledgeable, right? So they are going to tell back up, this is our communities.
Yeah, very good.
From our perspective in the East Valley, it's in Maricopa County, we have just massive gentrification across the county at this time. But our real weapon is to promote homeownership, and we have a lot of renters. And the other side of that is to just really build these leaders that can drive, you know, that can lead a group of people from the neighborhood to stop that. It's just people power.
Great, thank you all. I think actually the next question I'm going to ask also applies to both teams, so I'll do another the similar round. And I know we're approaching top of the hour, so anyone who has to leave, just know we will be sending out the recording for this session, and you'll be able to see this extended Q&A later on. So yeah, so what, I guess two sides of it, I guess, how were you able to fund your work? And then just talk about any intentions. I know Cheyenne talked about being able to pay your heat ambassadors and other intentions of paying community members. So I guess talk about how you were able to distribute funds across all the partners in your projects and things like that.
So
go ahead, Melissa.
I'll be quick. So this was a grant that was from the Vitalist Foundation that Maggie Messerschmidt, who at the time worked for the Nature Conservancy, secured. And our community partners were paid to go out and do all of their work. And we got a lot of in-kind donations to do the work as well. So definitely our community partners were paid. We paid for people to participate in the workshops. And we also attracted investment from other areas and the other funders in the Valley.
We also began and operated mostly off of grants for most of this work, but maybe Shai can talk a little bit about how the stipends were done. It was definitely a challenge to figure that out in the beginning. So
yeah, if anyone has experience with being a municipality and trying to pay people, you know that it's very difficult, and also through universities it's hard. So having the community orgs was really helpful, and then we were able to connect funders to the orgs directly. They got checks, and then the orgs paid the residents. And so that was like a really good model that I hope we can kind of mimic in the future. That's what we did with the energy burden focus groups, right, Charles?
Right.
And then,
Yes.
right. Yeah.
And if there's anybody out there that wants to continue to contribute to what we're trying to do, please help us out. We're a nonprofit.
Yes, and then in addition, we had a grant go through our main nonprofit Esperanza that we worked with through Beat the Heat. They held the grant money, and they were able to hire as employees of their nonprofit the heat ambassadors. In addition, they were able to use the funds that they had from the grant to purchase materials. Some of those materials were Visa gift cards, and that's how we paid certain stipends to folks. So that structure worked out for us. But going forward with the Drexel heat mitigation project, we did run into some barriers in hiring folks. And again, repeated, the university hired the residents, and they were actually like workers for a university for a period of time. So they had contracts and everything. It was long, but it was also helpful. And that was something that all of them now are working into integrating into their resumes. Right, Ms. Paul?
And in-kind donation, particularly the air conditioners. We received donations of air conditioners as well as fans. So that was also, so in-kind donations are also very helpful material, as Cheyenne said.
Right, and leveraging opportunities across our government space. So we had water department, planning commission, right? We had all of these other agencies and they had stuff to donate, right? So the health department, they donated the PPE, right? So we just kind of worked as a city team as well as a community team.
And just to add also from Arizona, what Melissa said, I think this is a very important point because normally we are used to ask people for free, for help free. And normally there is this misunderstanding that a people of color is gonna be working for free. So it is very important to respect people's time. And one of the best ways to respect people's time is paying them.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you all. I think we have one more question I want to get to before we wrap up for the day. So this goes out to both teams again. How have you, and you both touched on this a little bit, but how have you adapted to engaging communities with COVID? And I guess what are approaches that you are trying to take or lessons learned that have come about?
Well, you know, this is Zoom. The outreach is like now we have to learn. I call it Zoom one-on-one, and we have to continue to train people on this whole process, this new norm. But we are grassroots because we get the door bags. We put the information in the door bags. We go to door. One of the activities of the HEAT ambassadors and the people going out, actually meeting people on their level where they are. Meeting people where they are, which is very key and very important, even with COVID, but we're still able to do that by putting the information on the doorknob, in the door bag, on the doorknobs, and people getting the information in addition to the technology.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Masabi from Arizona. I also can say that COVID have teach us many things, right? But one of the things that COVID teaches us is that our parks, our community parks are not ready, that our society or the structure is not ready. So for us, I think something that it was very helpful, it was that we have spaces, like a spaces for opportunity, which is a community garden that is on the middle of the community where people can still meet and can be safe, right? So I think in that sense, we need to continue working for better parks and for better community centers.
Yes, I would absolutely echo that. That was also something we're working on in Philly. And it also opened up our opportunities for us to more deeply engage with community organizations, because often they had computers in their headquarters, or they often did partnerships with libraries in the area. So one of the ways that we tried to mitigate folks not being able to participate because of lack of virtual access was being able to have a space like, hey, this is your space that's nearby. They've said it's okay if you come and use the equipment there. If you need help there, I will come and help you if you're comfortable with that. So that was what we did. We actually got really lucky, and most people were totally comfortable and fine to join. And that was also because we were very inviting of phones, of being able to connect virtually through your phone. And that meant a lot of things, right? That meant when we needed people to answer polls, sometimes they couldn't because they were on their phone and they couldn't find it. So I just said, okay, you four, you call it out 1, 2, 3, 4, and everyone else put it in the poll. So we just kind of had to move as we went, but making it accessible to all types of different virtual mediums was helpful, and allowing a place for folks to go if they need it, that was also helpful.
And reach out to your universities. Reach out to the universities. Okay, we talked about Drexel. Temple University is a partner, and I know that they can play a role in helping us do this outreach and engagement.
And we were lucky too in the East Valley because we have a lot of Asian and Latino constituents essentially. So we're already using WhatsApp and texting, a lot of texting things. So texting were great for surveys. letting people know what's happening. And that was probably one of the best ways to get people there before COVID and during COVID to do something as a text.
And I think that a lot of these virtual platforms can also be adapted for your communities too. I mean, I've been on a meeting with Musavi where there's simultaneous translation going on where you can listen in whatever language that you want to. So that's actually more accommodating in many ways than the in-person meetings.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all. I just want to really say thank you to our presenters today. You all were fantastic, and I really think you gave great insight into your work, so I appreciate that. And thank you to those who are still on the line for your attendance for this first session of the Heat Stress series. So on the screen are our 2 upcoming sessions for the series, and you can learn more at the link on the screen. We hope you can make it to those. And once again, we'll be sending out a recording of this presentation, and you can find a version of it posted on the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, which also is home to other resources, including things focused on heat stress and today's presentations. And on the screen, you now can see our social media pages, so please feel free to engage with us that way and add us there. And we hope you'll join our online discussions in that way. But once again, thank you all, and we look forward to hearing about your experience in the post-webinar survey. And finally, from EcoAdapt, we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Any final thoughts from our presenters?
Thank you for having us. This was great, and we definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good to have you all.
Be safe.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
You too.